Hello, beautiful moms and entrepreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, and I'm your host of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. This is a place where we come together to learn, grow, and inspire. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello, Unbreakable Mompreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, your host, and today I'm here with Amber Larkins. So what I love, Amber and I were talking just shortly before, and we live parallel lives. So when it comes to real estate investing, and actually the whole purpose of this podcast is dealing with your trauma. But what I also like is she also has a marketing company that talks about how to market your business even more. So today we're going to kind of talk about several different topics that will probably pertain to all of you. So listen up and buckle up. Now, Amber, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to us?
Okay. Well, first, thank you, Charisse, for having me today. I appreciate you so much. And it's always so nice to meet like-minded people that you're aligned with. And I think God or the universe or whatever people refer to that as brings people like us together and brings listeners. And so I'm just very grateful for that. But yeah, if you want to know about me, so I wear a lot of hats. I think I like to keep myself extra busy for no reason. I'm just joking. But no, so I run a content agency. I started out in photography, shooting fitness because fitness is my background, and moved into the business arena. And then as a passion project, I was working on a project called Through the Transformation Through Trauma project. And so what this was where I would hear stories of business owners or fitness athletes, and they'd triumphed over their traumas. And I was like, I started photographing like their trauma and then their triumph. So like 2 photo shoots in one. And that led me into like a big passion project, which led me into starting this podcast called Through the Trauma, where I originally had started just interviewing people that shared stories of trauma and triumph, transformation stories, basically. And then I've recently moved into interviewing more experts and authors and coaches and, people that are more experts in their fields, whatever that looks like, different modalities or different types of trauma. And that's been a passion project of mine. And it's just catapulted me into this whole, really trying to build an ecosystem for people who are overcoming trauma and getting back on their feet and really trying to build something sustainable, learn how to make a living for themselves, learn how to make money for themselves. And so that everything fits together, although it seems like it's a bunch of different things going on in a bunch of different directions. So it's a little bit about me.
But I think, we as entrepreneurs, we always feel like we're in a whole bunch of different directions. But I really sat down to think recently because I felt the same as you and someone told me, well, Charisse, you've got to focus on one thing. They actually say, kill your babies, right? You have too many babies. You need to kill them. And I have 6 kids, so I'm not going to kill any of my babies. And that includes all of my things that I do. And so for me, writing the book that I did, Flipping the Iceberg, and the subheading used to say from trauma to triumph. And I changed it for reasons because I didn't want to just focus on that. So I changed the subheading, but you have your trauma people. And then I have this podcast that talks about women and making sure that you can overcome and that you can do what you need to and learning business skills. And then, obviously the real estate and other stuff. And so for you, it's kind of the same thing is that even though we think that everything's different, there's obviously a reason why we as entrepreneurs, some of us focus on a few different things. But if you really were to sit down and write out, because I did this, write out, okay, what do I want to accomplish here? What do I want to accomplish here? What do I want to accomplish here? There was a common denominator at the bottom. And so that's where, if you're struggling with some of those things and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. And I mean, we're being pulled in so many different directions. It's kind of like an octopus, right? That come up and figure out the core and the bottom line and the common denominator. If you can do that, then that's where you can catapult what you're trying to do from there. And so many times, do you kind of feel like that, okay, I'm starting to get burned out. What can I do? But are you starting to see the tie with everything that you're doing?
Absolutely. I'll tell you, a couple years ago, I had started photographing retreats. I got involved with some people. I got into a mastermind. There was a high level mastermind where I was meeting a lot of high level entrepreneurs, and I got invited out to do some different retreats, photograph retreats. So, in these retreats, even though I wasn't a part of the retreat, I was there working as the photographer, as the media team. I still had access to all of the information being taught. And I specifically heard God tell me in one of these retreats. One of the girls who was leading it, she's like, because they really try to make everything more inclusive at this retreat specifically. She looks at me and she said, "What is your word?" And they were talking about kind of like your overarching, people pick a word for the year. This was like an overarching word for your life. Like, what is your purpose? Like, what is your word? And before I could even think, it was like God spoke it and I spoke it. And it was like rescue. And I felt like that was truly my destiny. Like everything, that clarity that I was searching for and I was meditating on and trying to figure out and navigate through, all of a sudden it culminated on that word, which was like rescue. And I truly feel like my purpose is rescuing women and children specifically. Not that I have anything against men, but that's just my lot. I feel like rescue is, whether it be out of drug abuse or sexual abuse or, whatever type of, addiction that someone has. I just feel like, and maybe God will give me more clarity on that as I continue in business and continue to go through the actions. But right now, that's really where I feel like. And if I can help provide, I think as women, sometimes, especially as moms, we get so wrapped up in helping everybody else that sometimes we lose our self-worth and
Mhm.
our self-confidence. And I know that building business has helped me regain that self-confidence. And then also being able to see this. This is why I love photography, because I can show a woman, this is how beautiful you really are. And people will look at my camera and they're like, oh, that's me. And I'm like, yeah, that's how the world sees you. Like people see you that way. And I just think that showing women that they're beautiful, they're strong, they're resilient, they're powerful, they're empowered, and we can be that together. Like we can form that camaraderie with other women. And as moms and women, as we go through the periods of the stages of aging and things, I feel like it's so vital that we have those relationships and that we have these groups that can empower us.
I wholeheartedly agree. And so it sounds like you've been in several masterminds, which I think are very, very important, as have I. And when they talk about the origin story, what is your origin story? How do you get there? Because a lot of times we go through what we're going through so that we can help somebody else. I really do think that that can happen. I just got back from a 2,300-mile trip in 3 days, me driving the whole time. And we went and visited. My daughter served in an area. She was in a mission for 18 months and she served in an area. And so she got back in June and we went back to visit them, her not being on that mission anymore, just regular person. And it was really interesting to watch because all these people just loved her and just welcomed her. And you just sometimes don't realize the impact you have on people, positive
Mhm.
or negative, that you might have. And with her, I mean, I can honestly say she does not have an enemy in sight. But if you were to look at the person behind the smile, it's a totally different story. And so I think that sometimes that origin story we relate with so much, and that's how we get people to want to work with us, and that's how we get people to want to trust us. So, why do you feel it's important to share your story?
So, are you asking me specifically to share my personal story, or you're asking me why I think it's important for all people to share in
Yeah.
general?
Why do you think it's important? I mean, I gave
Yeah.
some reasons, but can you add to that? Sorry. And if you
Yeah,
want to share your story, great.
absolutely. So I mean, I tell people this for the podcast. I'm like, sharing your story, there's power in your story.
Mhm.
There's so much power that lies there. That is what makes us who we are. And honestly, anyone that's struggling with clarity, I struggled with clarity for years. Like, what is it that I'm really put here to do? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing? I love dabbling in a lot of different things. I always struggled with that because I
Right.
can relate to what you said, niche down. And it was always hard for me because my mind is constantly moving.
Yeah.
Um, but I tell people, with this story, like that is what shaped you and molded you and made you you.
Mhm.
Now there's a time and a place to share stories. Obviously, like if you're in the middle of trauma, you're not going to want to share that story right then because you need healing and you need to figure things out on your own. So you
Mhm.
share that maybe with a small group or people you truly trust. But to share on a public level or a more public level, like going on a podcast and sharing, I think you have to be at a place of healing. And I tell people this, like you need to be at least you don't have to share everything, but in your heart, I truly believe your heart knows what's right to share, and you follow your heart and your intentions are right, you're going to share what's right. But I believe that there's power there because that's what helps us connect to other people.
Mhm.
That's what helps us relate to other people. And it's also the beauty of fellowship between human beings. So if I've gone through something, I can truly reach back and help someone else through that situation.
Mhm.
Whereas someone else may be ahead of me and they can reach back and pull me through it.
Mhm.
When you go through difficult times in your life, there shouldn't, people feel shame. There shouldn't be shame, but it's a natural human response to things. And I feel like sometimes when we normalize, like, I'll give an example, like divorce. When I went through my divorce, I felt shame at first. And it's like when we can start to normalize that and say, this is something that, and I'm not saying like divorce is always a good option. Divorce in my situation was not a choice. I didn't have a choice in the situation, but I still felt shame over it. But when we start talking about those things a little bit more, people start sharing their stories, I realize I'm not alone.
Right.
I have other people that's been through that and that can help me navigate through that and know that what I'm feeling in that situation is not bad, but also what to do with those feelings to overcome them.
Mhm. No, that's so true. So, when you talk about marketing, what are some of the things if somebody's trying to figure out, like they've been in business for a while, but they're just not getting traction or they're just starting out? What are your recommendations to try to get more traction, is the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, so I don't mean to harp on this, but I can say in my personal experience, I think finding clarity. And sometimes clarity comes with action. So sometimes you have to take action before you find that clarity. Sometimes it's one foot in front of the other, but I believe if you can find clarity, then everything starts to hone in on the clarity that you have.
Right.
Now, beyond that, that's a kind of a practical thing, but you also can't rush clarity. It's not something that I can just say one day I'm going to make a decision to be clear on this. And then if that doesn't resonate with me, then there's all things that could happen, right? So that's a practical thing. It's a simple thing, but it's not always an easy thing. I guess it's not always simple because it takes a lot of time and processing and self-reflection and sitting with yourself to really discover that. Another thing I would say that I have found, just very practical advice that I've found in my own business, is I really was bad at follow up. I still struggle with follow up. And there is a mentor of mine that used to say the power is in the follow up. So I would say following up, like when you have someone that is possibly not even interested, if they're a lead and they're not interested in your services, to continue to stay in front of them in whatever way that looks like
Mhm.
social media or email, if you're emailing them or text messaging them or, whatever that looks like to stay in front of them and to continue to follow up with them.
Oh, that is so true. And have systems in place to be able to follow up because, if over the weekend I was driving and I pulled over because I was in Timbuktu land, it's a long story there, and I kept losing connection. And so I just pulled over when I was talking to this person, got all his information, and because I was in my car driving, obviously it didn't make it to my CRM. So now it's like, okay, now I need to add that in. I was still traveling yesterday as well. But so I think that that's where making sure that you have a system because now that person, as long as they get into your system, it's a workflow and they follow the workflow. And it's kind of like putting your raft in the river. And you set them on their path as they're going down, and then now you get another one, and they put it, and so you should have a whole bunch of people going down this river until eventually they get to purchase something. And so if you can think of it that way, if you're not putting anybody in the river, you're not going to have any output later down the road. So it's
So
follow up
true.
is essential.
And you're right. The systems and processes come before because if you, I'm telling you, I ran my business like this for years, and I don't honestly don't know how I even succeeded at all. But where I would just like, okay, I got to follow up, and I would literally write it on a piece of paper, like I need to follow up with this person
Mhm.
in 2 days, and sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't, and I'm just like, well, if they want to work with me, they'll contact me again. And we all know we just miss out on a lot. It's not to say that people won't contact you. I've had people chase me down to work with me, and I'm very grateful for those people.
Right.
But it just doesn't normally happen like that in business.
And it's not that they don't want to, but they probably wrote your thing on a piece of paper that now they don't know where it's at either. So it's just
Right.
making sure that you follow up. I know somebody who is a very successful real estate agent, and I asked what her secret was. She goes, I follow up on every single lead I get mercilessly. And
Yeah.
because of that, I mean, she's in a very, very small community, and I can't emphasize the word small enough. And yet she does 350 transactions a year. And I mean, this community, I think she probably does almost everyone because of that. So
Yeah.
it's crazy. All right. So you talk about your signature story, which is something that's making sure that you get it out there and what you do. But what are some other methods that we can do? Say that we finally do get our story. What's another step that we take in the journey to get more people or eyes on us?
So I think when we're talking about, so there's obviously a personal story and then there's a business story. And I think with our business story, that's what we see when we're looking at social media. That's where business, it's telling the story of what we do. It's
Mhm.
telling the story of how we can help people and like what, how we connect and how we work together.
Mhm.
So there's two distinct different stories. I think your origin story is more, where you come from, why you started your business, why you feel passionate about it, your mission, your vision. Whereas your signature story is like, this is how I can serve you. Like,
Mhm.
let me show you what it is that we do, how we can help you. So,
No, that's good. I appreciate that.
mhm.
And so you're doing marketing, all these things, and now all of a sudden, and I wouldn't say all of a sudden, but now you have a big passion project. So what led you to that? And if you can describe what it is that you're doing.
Yeah. So again, which I kind of touched on this in the beginning intro, but the I started hearing stories. I was just doing photography back then, and I would work with people, and I think because I'm an empath, people would just kind of open up to me and start sharing stuff, and I'm just like, your story is really powerful. This could inspire a lot of people. And the more that this happened, I'm like, it's just not fair that I get to hear these stories and other people don't. So I started exploring ways that I could share these stories. Tried to do this on social media, and I'm just like, it's just not enough. I feel like not enough people was seeing my social media. I probably was not doing all the things to grow it back then. This has probably been 10 years ago. But as I just, God started placing this idea of this podcast on my mind. And I started the podcast after being at a retreat and just getting clarity around things at a retreat. If you've never been to a retreat, highly, highly recommend because
Mhm.
they are very valuable to help you gain clarity and just figure out what it is you're here to do. But I started the podcast, and now the podcast is kind of taken on its own thing. Whereas, now I truly feel like it's a help anyone that's going through any type of trauma, um, whether it's like loss of a loved one or like drug abuse, or I've interviewed people that have sex addictions, people that have had been in sex trafficking, which are, those are passion projects in and of themselves. Like, it's who we donate to, like the sex trafficking stuff. And so it's topics
Mhm.
that need to be more awareness brought around them. They're hard topics to talk about, but I truly feel like there's healing. And I believe that if we can get rid of the shame that a lot of people feel around those hard topics, we can change, we can get people healed and then get on the road to thriving and excelling and helping other people. It's a domino effect.
And that is the part that I think so many people are held back because of their trauma. And if they can understand it, if they can identify it, I'm tired, right? And I never ever say that I'm tired. I just don't. But today I'm tired. That was a long trip. And
Mhm.
so he's like, Charisse, what's going on? And I realize it has nothing to do with him. It has nothing, like sometimes you have emotions and you're working through those emotions. And I went back to my childhood where I grew up. And there's a whole lot of emotions that I have there and wasn't able to spend a lot of time. And so it's like, okay, what is happening to me? What am I going through? And for those that have listened to my podcast, there are stories, or if you've read my book, I definitely talk about stories that happened in that city. And so it's like, all right, I've got to come around it and understand and work through the emotions again that I wasn't expecting, wasn't experiencing before. And so I think that sometimes if you can, it really is like an iceberg that just sits there. And if you can't identify it and flip it and overcome it, it does affect you. And once you can climb that iceberg instead of dive to the bottom and identify it and become a victor of it, then you can move on to where you're supposed to go. I think of it as, it's sunlight. You have those rays that are coming down sometimes that it looks like, I mean, there's sunlight's shining through the clouds, and so there's rays. And sometimes I think that's God, right? Thinking, and with us, he's sending messages metaphorically to us of what we need to do. And we have to make sure that those are unobstructed so that we can listen and do what we're supposed to. And a lot of times that trauma doesn't allow us to have a clear message.
I love that analogy, by the way. That's awesome. I think you're 100% accurate on that, and I think that that's a beautiful analogy. And I just think that the brain is like a muscle,
Mhm.
and the more that we train our muscles, the more that we condition them to be able to handle more. And
Mhm.
I feel like any hard or uncomfortable situation that someone's put into, hence business,
Mhm.
or marriage, or I mean, it's rewarding, but it's also challenging. And I think that it's when we put ourselves intentionally in situations like that and we challenge ourselves, we're building stamina, we're building a muscle in our brain that is then now we're able to handle more and we're able to handle more. And
Yeah,
I believe how that really relates to trauma is, there's layers to trauma.
there
And
is.
it's like we could experience childhood trauma and it could not really come out, manifest. We can feel like we've healed from it. Maybe we've had psychotherapy, whatever, we've healed from it. And then, 20 years later, 30 years later, it comes out in a reaction and you're like, oh my, that's still a root of that childhood trauma. And it's a process. And I feel like again, the more that we can go back and be aware of that trauma and be able to like overcome that trauma, like what you were describing, it's building that stamina. It's building that place in our brains that's helping us overcome. And now the next time we can peel back another layer and get stronger, peel back another layer and get stronger.
Right.
So it's beautiful. It's a beautiful process of life. And you're right. I 100% agree with you here. When you can overcome that, you
Mhm.
feel a release. It's
Yeah, you do.
gone
Yeah, you do.
like that. And then maybe you deal with something a little bit deeper. And it's a beautiful process of life.
It is. And I think it's important to talk about also that sometimes you can revert back. And so, but it's an easier journey to get through it much quicker. It's kind of like running a race. It might be 15-minute miles or whatever, and then it goes to 11 and then 10, but then you stop running for a while. You go back to 15, but you can improve much faster if you stick with it. And so I think that with life, we just have to enjoy the journey and understand that we need to be proactive with our lives, not the victims, not reactive. And if we can do that, I think that we can be much happier. And we take control of our life, so much more productive.
Absolutely.
So if you were sitting on a park bench and your 19-year-old self came up to you and sat down next to you and you started talking to her, what advice would you give her?
Gosh, I don't think there's enough time in this podcast. I had a major transformation in my life, and there was so many things that I've learned through my experiences in business and in marriage. Those are like the two pinnacle things
Yeah.
that I truly
Mhm.
believe put a mirror in front of my face and had me face some of the hardest things that I had to face. But through that process, like you said, has been some of the most rewarding things that I've ever experienced. And I'm at a place now in my life where I'm like, probably the happiest that I've ever been. Is everything perfect? No, but life is never perfect. It's
Right.
perfectly imperfect, right? So if I had to give myself one piece of advice, I would say completely get rid of the way of thinking that you have right now, because honestly, if we feed into what culture tells us, like what the news channels tells us,
Mhm.
what the media, the music, even the television, like sometimes that keeps us from being able to truly find ourselves and think for ourselves. So we're being persuaded to think a certain way. So I would say get rid of your current way of thinking, go back to nature and find yourself there, because that's truly, I believe there's power there in being able to go inside. I believe all the answers that we need is found inside of us.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of exploring self until we can get those answers to come out.
Totally agree with that. As you were saying that, the song Jesus Take the Wheel came to my mind
Yeah.
because I mean, we're driving the car, and seriously, after the amount of miles I put on this last weekend, yes, staring straight ahead can get tiresome sometimes. And sometimes you don't know, but if I'm not sure where to go, my GPS was right there telling me where I needed to go. And so I think that sometimes I know where I want to get to from point A to point B. This is where I want to get. But how I get there might be this way and this way, and but eventually I'll get there as long as that's where I'm supposed to go. And so if we can continue to do exactly what you said and just make sure that we we have an end goal and that we listen to a few other people. It could be God, it could be your universe, it could be your parents, your friends that are good influences. I think that that's where it helps. And yeah, enjoying the journey because if you just keep going, well, if I can only get to, you're always going to be looking at that. And instead of
Mhm.
enjoying the journey, which is the life that we have.
Yeah. And I do believe too, like it's a process of looking at like taking an analyze your life, take an analysis of your life and the people that you're around. I'm sure
Yes.
you and a lot of your listeners have heard this, but you're the product of the five people you're around the
Yep.
most. Like,
Hmm.
who is that five-person circle that you're around? Are they a positive influence? Are they empowering you? Are they inspiring you? Are they doing things that are above you? Do you help them and they help you sometimes? Or is it a one-way street
Yep.
constantly?
Yep.
And when you start losing people that are, I don't want to say losing, but you start
Yeah.
kind of like not being around that person quite as much if they're not as inspiring or encouraging, then you have a good infrastructure to make decisions. But I just want to say this too. Don't underestimate the power that you have to make your own decisions. I struggled with this for so many years, and coming out of a marriage that my husband, he had me believing that I couldn't make any decisions on my own. And that was a big hurdle I had to jump through, like getting back enough confidence in myself that, hey,
Yes.
I can make a decision.
Hmm.
And if you make the wrong decision, guess what? You learn from it. So don't be scared to make decisions, because I struggled with that for a long time.
And yes, I could go into a lot on that too. But trust in yourself, trust in your intuition. You have just as much of a brain as anybody else on this planet. So why are you taking their advice over what you think that you need to do? And I think that that's the important thing is that just because someone tells you what they want you to do, doesn't mean that you have to listen to it and do it. You have that freedom to choose. The song Jesus Take the Wheel came to my mind
Yeah.
because I mean, we're driving the car, and seriously, after the amount of miles I put on this last weekend, yes, staring straight ahead can get tiresome sometimes. And sometimes you don't know, but if I'm not sure where to go, my GPS was right there telling me where I needed to go. And so I think that sometimes I know where I want to get to from point A to point B. This is where I want to get. But how I get there might be this way and this way, and but eventually I'll get there as long as that's where I'm supposed to go. And so if we can continue to do exactly what you said and just make sure that we we have an end goal and that we listen to a few other people. It could be God, it could be your universe, it could be your parents, your friends that are good influences. I think that that's where it helps. And yeah, enjoying the journey, because if you just keep going, well, if I can only get to, you're always going to be looking at that. And instead of enjoying the journey, which is the life that we have. The song Jesus Take the Wheel came to my mind
Yeah.
because we're driving the car, and seriously, after the amount of miles I put on this last weekend, yes, staring straight ahead can get tiresome sometimes. And sometimes you don't know, but if I'm not sure where to go, my GPS was right there telling me where I needed to go. And so I think that sometimes I know where I want to get to from point A to point B. This is where I want to get. But how I get there might be this way and this way, and but eventually I'll get there as long as that's where I'm supposed to go. And so if we can continue to do exactly what you said and just make sure that we we have an end goal and that we listen to a few other people. It could be God, it could be your universe, it could be your parents, your friends that are good influences. I think that that's where it helps. And yeah, enjoying the journey, because if you just keep going, well, if I can only get to, you're always going to be looking at that. And instead of enjoying the journey, which is the life that we have. And so when it comes to business, when it comes to being a mom, when it comes to being a wife, that if you don't necessarily agree with everything, that's okay, because your opinion matters too. And you owe it to yourself to speak up. So I love that. And I love the perfectly imperfect that, yeah, if my 19-year-old self, complete difference, I wouldn't even be anywhere close to where I am today because of the choices and the path. And I embrace that, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the life that I've had, including the mistakes. So great advice.
Yeah, same here.
Well, if our listeners wanted to find you, how would they get a hold of you?
So I'm pretty active on Instagram. My Instagram, my business or my content agency is Empowerography Files. So we empower people. That's where the name come from. It used to be Photography Files, and then I moved more into empowering businesses and fitness. So you can find me there through my business. You can find me, my personal page is _Amber_Larkins. And that's kind of just my mindset on things, my just things that I feel compelled to share. And then I do put a lot of the podcast stuff on there as well, because trauma is a passion project of mine. And so those are the two places that I'm probably the most active. I'm also on TikTok under Empowerography. I'm also on YouTube, which is mainly just my podcast. And then you can find my podcast on all platforms under Through the Trauma podcast.
That's great. Well, Amber, you've been a delight. Thank you so much for coming on. And listeners, trauma is a real thing, and we all go through it. It's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's embrace it and really take time to figure it out, and so that you can heal and overcome. And if you're having a hard time, then please reach out to either Amber or myself. So go out and make it a great day. See you later.
Thank you, Charisse.
Beautiful moms, remember, you are unbreakable. Keep illuminating the world with your strength, pursuing your dreams, and reveling in the splendor of motherhood. This is Charisse Walker, bidding you farewell for now. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on the next episode of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. Until then, keep shining bright. Signing off with love, Charisse Walker.